All right, everybody. I'm not sure where we left off in class. We're trying to get us on the same page here. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and do something a little different, trying to figure out where we are in like Africa and India. So what I thought that I would do is just change course here a little bit and talk about the Meiji Restoration in Japan. And this kind of goes along with the Japanese nationalism that we had previously talked about, but this may clear it up a little bit about what is happening. So Japan, the Meiji Restoration is all about the modernization of Japan. And from the start of the reign of Tokugawa Ieyasu in the 1600s, all the way through the 1800s, and even a little bit before that in Japan, the Japanese had practiced what they call the national policy of seclusion. And during this time, much of the world had undergone this great transformation. During the Industrial Revolution, Great Britain, the United States, Germany had exploded and gotten much bigger and more economically powerful and stronger than anyone else in the world. And so Japan has been isolated. The Japanese economy was like feudal. It was backwards compared to that of the Western world. And so since the Japanese economy was stuck in the past and was well behind, the Japanese were living with this belief that they had formed the best society possible. The Japanese had a system where nearly 80% of its people lived as farmers in the countryside, living merely hand-to-mouth, day-to-day, trying to get enough food to eat. The rice farming techniques were the same as they had been forever. But there was no fertilizer, there was no mechanized machines to assist them. And along with that, to support the aristocracy, the upper classes and the samurai, taxes were extremely high, and you could still pay them with food, with agricultural products. The Japanese still did not use a lot of cash currency. So Japan in the mid-1800s would have been very similar to Japan way back in the 1300s during the feudal era. There was no factory machinery, no steam engine, no large industrial factories, no mechanical production whatsoever. And there was also no large reserves or stashes of monetary capital. Things were going on the way they always had. Until Commodore Perry shows up in Tokyo Bay with his steamship and his pistol. And the Japanese believed that the steam engine and the cannon on it and the pistol were symbols of a dragon, something that goes deep into the powerful ideas in Japanese mythology. Admiral Perry forced the Japanese to sign what is known as the Treaty of Friendship. The United States was entering the game of imperialism. Everybody else had done it in Africa and South America and other parts of Asia. And the Treaty of Friendship was specifically designed to give the United States a favorable trading agreement with Japan. This is what we want to do. Now this will completely overhaul Japan. And within 50 years, the concept of feudalism collapses. And overnight, it's as if they snap their fingers like Thanos and bam, a new modern industrial world was created. Japan saw itself as highly civilized. And they have the ability to sacrifice short-term tangible gain for a long-term result. This will be known as the Meiji Restoration. And it'll be, let's roughly say, 1868 to 1912. as Japan began to look at itself differently, they began to send their young men to Western countries, as they'd always had, to Japan, or to the United States, to Canada, to Germany, to Great Britain, to wherever. And they studied the technology and the legal systems, the science ideas, the technological parts of industry. And when these young men returned, their main objective is to get the government modernized, to try and overhaul the government, the formation of a modern Japanese economy. Now, all this is taking place simultaneously with imperialism, like King Leopold going into the Congo, England going into China, the Sepoy Rebellion in India. All of this is going on at the exact same time. And the Japanese saw military strength and military power was the only way to get what they wanted. They wanted modern implements, a railroad. They wanted a telegraph system. They wanted steam engines. They wanted railroads. They wanted industrial factories. They literally wanted it all. And it is the Japanese imperial government that was in charge of all this industrial development. And things started off very, very, very slowly. Like, where do you even begin? The government's in charge, but production was barely measurable. You couldn't really see it. It's going to take time. First of all, you need to learn what to do. Then you've got to train your workforce. It's okay if you have the idea like Peter the Great, but everybody else needs to be trained and shown what to do. So this isn't going to happen overnight. And one of the things that is going to start, all right, is we're going to learn from the United States and we are going to learn from Great Britain. We're going to adapt all of these ideas. We're going to get the idea of the post office, and we're going to get schools, and we're going to get everything the West has, but we're going to take time and we are going to do it right. And one of the things that the Japanese are going to create is known as a Zaibatsu. And a Zaibatsu is simply like a Japanese corporation, right, where you've got investors. You've got people who invest money and they want a return on that investment. Well, the hardest part of industrial growth is getting cash, getting capital. And capital doesn't have to be just money. It can be equipment. It can be tools. It can be a warehouse or a factory. All that is capital, the things you use to do your job. And a former samurai named Iwasaki Yotaro solves this problem kind of brilliantly. My man here, he managed a small shipping fleet as a samurai, these old, boats, ferrying, cargo between domains. Now, using his experience, he bought old, like barely, seaworthy ships from the government. And he slowly began a large shipping business. As his business grew, he bought better ships, and he would go out into the harbor where the American ships were docked. Hey, I got a smaller ship. Do you want me to unload your cargo? How much will you give me? And so he goes out into deep water and brings the cargo ashore, making it easier on the large American transoceanic ships. Little by little, he builds better ships and more ships until he's got a fleet. Since he's in the know and he knows people, he gets the contract, if you will, to be the main shipper. He'll take Japanese products from Japan out to the Americans and the British, and the American and British products back in. And then he will eventually take that money and he will found a bank, like the Bank of America or a Senshi Bank in China. He creates a bank that will eventually become the modern Mitsubishi corporation, the engine company, the car company, the technology company. Other Zaibatsus will quickly follow suit. And what really helps Japan internally is a new railroad system. It was very difficult and expensive to ship things internally on the Japanese archipelago. The geography, the mountainous geography, was really tough. Plus, you have a series of disconnected islands. However, railroads now solved this problem. Areas of Japan that were untapped areas of resources or were too hard to get to, now with motorized transportation, you can get there. It's like the steam engine going up the Congo River in Africa. This opens up the door for new not only raw materials, but labor resources as well. And simply because the Japanese, as you can see up here, before this it was too difficult to travel 50 miles from here to Greensboro. It was just too tough. Now it is easy. And so the Japanese people, again, are united under this effort. It created a stable environment. The Japanese people took on a very interesting mindset. Again, they're able to sacrifice short-term tangible gain for long-term result. I may not get to see the fruits of my labor, but my children and my grandchildren will. And so in a span of nearly 30 to 50 years, it's the fastest industrialization model in world history. Japan, practically overnight, is modern. And so, by 1900, by the 20th century, Japan has made incredible gains. And they want to seek acknowledgement. They want gratification for what they had accomplished. And looking at what the Europeans were doing and what the United States had done, they believed, very simply, that it was the acquisition of colonies and imperial conquest by the military was simply the way to get Europe's attention. And to do this, we have to go to war. And we need to go to war with a prime-time opponent. So from 1905 to 1906, the Japanese enter war with Melega. Vavas Lubu, my little capitalist Americans. And they defeat the Russian fleet in the Pacific, and then they declare war. And because Russia had never been given any respect or validation by the Europeans, Japanese like, woo! We defeated Russia, we beat them, yeah, all right, you know, vodka, shtick, and golf, Fabergé, woo! And everyone else was like, well, yeah, but like it's Russia. Like nobody really cares. And this makes the Japanese angry, and you can kind of get why. And so then the Japanese will move the Russians out of part of mainland Asia in Manchuria, and they gain some territory here. And they're happy when the peace treaty is written by United States President Theodore Roosevelt, and it heavily favors Japan. And so by the outset of World War I, the Japanese are acquiring raw materials. Iron ore, coal, bauxite, things that they don't have. And they need this stuff because their iron production, their coal mining, and chemical manufacturing are essential parts of industry. But Japan doesn't have any of those raw materials. And then World War I happens. And while the violence is going on in Europe, the only two industrial economies left are the United States and Japan. So the emperor's brother, a guy by the name of Prince Konye, K-O-N-Y-E, is given a seat at the Paris Peace Conference, the Treaty of Versailles. Germany's not invited, Russia's not invited, but Japan is. And the Japanese are proud of their achievements. And by the 1920s, Japan is doing great. They've got a 90% literacy rate. They're doing well. There's still a gap between rich and poor in society, but the Japanese have done incredible work. Their cities look more Western. Their standard of living has been raised. Boys and girls are going to school. The Japanese people still work long hours, but they're catching up. And by the 20s, the Europeans are angry because the Japanese products are competitive in quality and in price with the Europeans. Their stuff is really good. What are they doing? And while the Western Europe and the United States had underwent growing pains when they became industrialized. Japan is experiencing those frustrations as well. The United States and Great Britain had to go through trial and error. Japan had industrialized at warp speed because they had a blueprint, they had help, and now the countries that helped them are kind of angry. Japan has almost made it, but still, Japan, here's Teddy Roosevelt, here's Japan, and here's the aging czar. Things just are good, but they are not perfect. Because what's going to hit, there's two things. Number one is a massive earthquake strikes the country. It erases all the hard work and economic gains that the Japanese had made. And because they try to handle everything internally, they try to rebuild internally, there's a massive inflation. Japanese products were expensive. It was really hard after the earthquake to go get raw materials. Their manufacturing centers, their factories were damaged. And so now, imported goods from the United States or Great Britain were cheaper. And so Japan is struggling. And as they start to recover from the earthquake, they get hit again with the Great Depression. And as the Great Depression reciprocates worldwide, there is massive, massive unemployment in Japan. As a result of this, there was a switch in the government from a civilian-minded government to one that's more militaristic. Look, we tried the civilian way, we talked about this in nationalism, and now Japan needs raw materials. And so while Japan industrializes faster than anyone else ever, they also recover from the Depression quicker and faster. By 1934, the Japanese have recovered because they gear their industry towards the military. Weapons, goods for war, iron production, steel production, tanks, trucks, planes. Electrical power plants and chemical factories are focusing on new technology and better science, how to make it quicker and cheaper and more efficient. And in the heart of the Great Depression, Western countries are being outdone by the West. Japan is equal and competitive, but they still want recognition, they still want quality. And so around the young emperor, a guy named Hirohito, the ancient samurai values are revived. He's got a militaristic war hawk group of advisors saying, let's go out and conquer foreign lands. It's what the Europeans did. If they can do it, then so can we. So Hirohito becomes revered as the head of the government. And while China was fighting its own war of nationalism between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, the Japanese went after territory that had a lot of natural resources: rubber, tin, oil, iron ore, coal. This not only threatens Western European powers, but also a great friend of Japan, the United States. And in 1936, when the Japanese government joins Italy and Germany, forming the Axis powers, the Japanese make a mistake and they begin to plan the eventual attack on the United States. Pearl Harbor will make World War II a truly world war. It will last 6.5 years. It will claim 69 million lives and see atomic power used on Japan. And while some of that is negative, to look at Japan, the way they industrialized quicker and faster than anyone else, they studied ideas, they borrowed ideas, then they adapted and adopted them to make them fit their own specific need. As a result, Japan becomes the first modern industrialized Asian country. They catch up to Europe and the United States in a very short time span. So there's a quick look at the Meiji Restoration. We'll figure out where we are in imperialism tomorrow, and I'll have that YouTube ready for you for Friday. Have a good afternoon, everybody.